And I'm gonna be high.
Good on you, Donald. I'm the Rocket Man, yeah.
I'm a rocket man. And I'm gonna be
Rocket Man. I'm a rocket man. I wanna go to the moon.
Don Favier, the CEO of GreenScreens.ai and co-founder and founder of many other companies along the way. And the biggest news, obviously, when we're recording this, it's now post-acquisition. Triumph has acquired, is intending to acquire GreenScreens.ai. I can't talk a whole lot more about it other than that because it's still in its phase of an acquisition and everybody understands that. But Don, give me a high level, what you can, of why Greenscreens was acquired and what the future vision is, and we can leave out any details you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. And again, just the disclaimer, we are in that quiet period. We've announced the intent to be acquired. We are pending regulatory approval from the government because Triumph is a publicly traded company as well as a financial institution. So a lot that we can't talk about, but I will talk about, the things we can talk about. So look, GreenScreens.ai, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are a machine learning based predictive pricing product for truckload freight. We serve brokers and 3PLs with our product. We've been in business since 2020 and we've had a lot of momentum in our short lifetime, right? We brought our product to market just 4 years ago and now have 220 brokers using our product. And one of the things that really sets us apart is, we've built up a lot of density, $30 billion in real time, extremely clean data. We are connected into 14 different TMSs so that as soon as loads are being booked, those loads are flowing to us untouched by a human, unmanipulated by a human, actually what the load is being booked for, and then any changes that may happen to that load as it moves through its life cycle. So we have really real-time visibility to what prices are actually doing across this $30 billion of data, 220 brokers. So we've always kind of touted the density of our data, the veracity of our data, or the accuracy, the cleanliness of our data, which is really important when you're talking about AI and machine learning, right? It's classic garbage in, garbage out. You feed any algorithm garbage, it's going to spit out garbage. So we've really concentrated from the very beginning on how do we ensure that the data we are feeding into our algorithm is really clean,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then lastly, I think one of the things that's helped us as green screens to be successful is just the neutrality of our platform. I think there are a lot of freight companies that have tried to do this either for themselves or to build something like this and sell it into the market. And the biggest challenge is always the neutrality. As a
Yeah.
broker, I'm not going to give one of my competitors my data. As a broker, if I've built it for myself, I may have a lot of data, but I don't have visibility in my data to my blind spots where I'm not currently moving freight, right? So, those are kind of the three things that have set green screens apart. Going back to I think the end of the third quarter or the fourth quarter, Aaron Graft, who's the CEO of Triumph, had announced that they intend to enter a new segment, Triumph Intelligence, which is a new business unit. So today they have Triumph Pay, they have their factoring business, they also have a consumer bank under the Triumph Financial umbrella. But Aaron had previously announced that they intend to start a new segment of their business, Triumph Intelligence, which is really based on using the data that they have. And if you look at Triumph, they have, more factoring and payment data than anybody else in the industry, right? That data is also extremely clean and verified because it's actual payment data,
Yeah.
right? So while it may not be real time at the time of booking, it is very clean, verified data. And again, a neutral party, right? They are serving carriers, shippers, brokers, but they are not a freight broker. They are never going to compete against the customers. So he had announced that they were going into that segment. And I think, back in December, you may recall that they also acquired Isometric Technologies,
I saw that.
who is another tech company in our space, for those that aren't familiar with them, that focus on performance management for carriers and shippers and brokers. Um, so if you think about, kind of what makes the clock work in freight and in broker, it's price, performance, and capacity, right? So that was kind of the vision that Aaron had put out with the creation of this Triumph Intelligence business. And frankly, that is also GreenScreen's vision as
Yeah, it's a
well.
good fit.
We've been exclusively focused on pricing, but as we look at how can we expand our footprint, we were also considering capacity and performance as a component of that. So it was just a really from a vision perspective and the data perspective, it was a really natural fit. Mind you, we weren't for sale, and if you would have asked me 18 months ago who a potential buyer of Greenscreens would have been, I don't know that I would have come up with Triumph, but it just makes so much sense. As we
Yeah.
started talking about it, it was like, of course this makes sense. But it wasn't just the product and the vision fit. I think even culturally, they're a really good company. They have a great reputation in the marketplace, and we have a lot of shared values, transparency and respect and humility and innovation and customer obsession, right? So just even culturally between the two companies, it just feels like a really good fit.
I can echo that. I saw the news or the press release, and I was like, Triumph, really? But now that you've broke it down, and now I didn't know about Aaron talking about the intelligence of Triumph or Triumph Intelligence and all of that. That just makes sense. And I mean, we'll talk a little bit about, but like my perspective outside looking in is, oh, Don built Don and others, right? You've got a whole team, but Don built a really exciting pricing company. And then for every founder and every CEO, they should always be prepared for an exit, even if they're not trying to. I always say I'm building rocket shipping to sell it, but I have no intention to sell it. So that all of the things that I'm building, it doesn't just take me to run it, right? So it's a real business, and it has SOPs, and it has process, and it has EOS, all of that stuff. But you also have to build into the right segment to be ready at the right time. And so if I wouldn't have said Triumph was a buyer, but as soon it kind of speaks to the quality of your company that as soon as they said, hey, we're going to get into intelligence, within months they're intending to acquire Greenscreens. You have competitors, right? And so there's a reason that they chose you guys. And so that's kind of a testament to, seems like you built a good brand. Let me talk a little bit about building Greenscreens. How long have you been the CEO, and when did you start there?
So GreenScreens was founded it was just 5 years ago, so in March of 2020. I
Great
joined,
timing.
yeah, right. I joined the company that summer. So I originally joined the company as kind of interim CEO and chief product officer, the thought being that I'm a first time CEO. I had never been a CEO before, but at the time that I joined, the product was, I like to say, pre MVP, post hypothesis, right? So,
Yeah.
not quite ready to go to market. We had three really great early adopters. So, NFI, Gulf Relay, and RDS were kind of early adopters, the early customers. There was a product, but it wasn't quite MVP yet. And didn't really have a well defined go to market strategy, right? So the thought being that I would join the company as interim CEO until the point at which we had a product that was ready to take to market. My background is actually go to market strategy, product strategy. I had spent 20 years doing that before joining Greenscreens. So yeah, so I started in August of 2020, worked with the team here on kind of getting to a post MVP product, working on what our go to market strategy would be. We launched the product. We did a soft launch in like December of 2020 just to test the market, test our messaging, make sure it was resonating, and had some decent success with that. Signed on a few more pilot customers, and then we officially went to market in April of 21. Right, is when we officially launched the product into
And
market.
somehow you went from interim to you stayed CEO. How did that happen?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, I spent, part of my deal was I was going to help the founders find the permanent CEO. And look, I know my weaknesses. I had never raised money before. I had
I was
never
going to ask
led,
you about that
yeah,
next. Good segue. I'll put a pin there.
I had never raised money before. I had never led a sales team before, though I've, participated in tech sales for many years, but I'd never been a sales leader. And, my conversation, Ben Gordon is the chairman of our board, and he's the one that brought me in. And I had said, look, it makes sense for me to be CEO right now, but at some point you're going to want a real CEO, and that's not me, but let me help you find that person. So We had interviewed a lot of people and did a couple test runs with a couple people. And, what I was finding is in a lot of the people we were interviewing, they had the same skill set as me. They were more go-to-market strategy people. And I was like, well, we don't need another me, right? We need
Yeah.
someone who complements or that we complement each other. So we just really kind of were challenged to find the right fit for a CEO for a company, targeting freight brokers. So had that knowledge because I think different lot of people. You need to really be able to speak their language, and for the size and scale of a company that we were, right? So at that time, we did start trying to raise money, and I learned a lot through that process, and
Yeah.
closed our seed round in February of 22. And it was kind of after that the board pretty much said, "Okay, are you done playing yet? Are you ready to are you ready to be the CEO?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense now because we haven't found the CEO, and I've been interim for a long time, so let's do it."
So you had to do a seed round. I'm going to pull on a few threads there, but one, you mentioned Ben Gordon. I think everybody knows who he is too. So he was one of the co-founders of GreenScreens, right?
He was, yeah. So he
So
was. So little backstory: GreenScreens was kind of born out of a company that was started as a digital freight brokerage back at the end of 2017, and really coming into the market with the intention of competing against Uber Freight and Convoy and all of the digital freight marketplaces that were coming out around that time. But found out fairly quickly that, they weren't nearly well capitalized enough to really compete against Uber and
well,
Convoy and yeah,
maybe a blessing in disguise if how Uber Freight's doing today and how Convoy ended. So
right, exactly. So that's how Ben got involved. Ben met the founders of that company and, just through conversation, his recommendation was, look, they had built a lot of tech to run their own business on. A lot of it was table stakes, TMS type stuff,
yep.
commoditized technology. But they had started working on this one piece of tech, which was this pricing engine. And again, it was kind of not, it was an internal product feature in its infancy, but he was like, this is really interesting and compelling. My recommendation is that you take the technology out of that, start a whole separate entity, and focus on the tech. And that's how Green Screen started. So
Yeah,
from
isn't
that,
that interesting too? Like
yeah,
Ben and there's others like him in the industry identify the opportunity out of a whole business model and then that becomes the company. But most founders, when they just start a company, think they have to offer every service available.
yeah,
They say, hey, I should be TQL and be small. And it's really the companies, and obviously Green Screens had a successful exit, so I can say, hey, that was a good idea. But ISO, a much smaller transaction, ISO was a very niche, narrow
yeah,
offering for performance. And I don't know them well enough to know everything, but they didn't do everything.
yeah.
And those are the companies that triumph and others will roll up. And so if you're a founder, it's just a more proof positive.
Yeah.
Find a niche, build
I mean,
something valuable there.
I've been in freight tech for a long time, 25 years to be exact, and I've seen what happens to companies both firsthand and secondhand when you try to do too much and be too many, all things to all people when you just get spread so thin. And it is impossible to be extraordinary at everything, right? You may
Yeah.
do one or two things really well, but it's hard to be really good at everything. And I think that's a big part of our success is that we have stayed laser focused on pricing, and there were no shortage of suggestions, especially early on all of the different directions. Very early on, I remember somebody saying, "Well, you guys should do appointment scheduling because, appointment scheduling and pricing go hand in hand." And I was like,
Well, they go hand and then like maybe a third person down the row's hand.
yeah, right, exactly. So, that was one thing that I was really solid on was we need to stay really focused, at least until we become much larger and,
Yeah.
are profitable. And then maybe we can look at how we diversify. And those were things that we were beginning to look at prior to this, not appointment scheduling,
Yeah.
but diversifying or going a little
Yeah.
bit broader before, we started the conversation with Triumph. But I think that's a big part of our success is that we stayed really focused on doing what we do really, really well.
Nice. Now I'm going to pivot. And so, anybody who's listening, this is going to get real financial for a little bit, but I think it's interesting. So, take me through your seed. How did you raise a seed round? What was all involved in that? Because it's like you have an MVP, you might have some revenue.
Yeah.
Do you make a pitch deck and just talk to a bunch of VC companies, or how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, we had some revenue. We had, geez, I'm gonna maybe misstate this, but I want to say we had a dozen and a half customers at the time. Had a pitch deck. You know, we had some customer success stories, so we put together a pitch deck. Now, very fortunate that within our family we have some very well connected people in the investment world.
Yeah, for sure.
So we, were given introductions to, some large, some small, some family offices, some angel investors, and really just went out and started pitching it. And it took us, I want to say it took us about 4, maybe 6 months before we really were able to raise that initial seed round. And the biggest challenge is we had a lot of people that were interested in investing in us. And in fact, we were oversubscribed for our seed round, but nobody that wanted to take the lead investor role. Right. So we had a
Mm,
bunch of people that were willing to write smaller checks and, smaller even being six figures, but we were looking to raise more than that. Right.
yeah,
So it took us about that long really to find the lead investor, and we finally did, right? So Tiger Global stepped forward to be the lead investor in that round, and then we have about 8 other kind of investors that then followed in that round with them. So that was kind of a long, involved process. Again, it was my first time raising money, but I had a lot of help and guidance along the way in doing that. And that really helped us, right? That helped us to accelerate our growth. We were able to hire more people, right? So use of funds on that seed round was really predominantly in the sales and marketing area. So we had a good product. We had, some customer success stories, but now we needed people to go out and sell and market this great product that we had. So that seed round was really focused in sales and marketing and being able to go to trade shows. I think it was
yeah.
like we signed that in February of 2022, and I was like, yes, I can go to Capital Ideas and get a booth this time, right? Like, because now I have money, I'm not bootstrapped. So that was our first conference, was Capital Ideas in 2022. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Learned through that, and then we did an A round. So I'm sorry, I'll pause there. You asked specifically about seed, but
Well, so seed I always ask because it like I know Series A gets a lot of attention, but you never get to Series A if you don't do a successful seed round. And like
yeah,
there's I don't know the numbers, but it's a very large percentage of companies never make Series A, but they do
right,
get a seed. And then they sometimes it's 5 years before they make it to A if they do, and there's bridge after bridge after bridge. But you guys took a different approach, and I have a lot of opinions about venture capital and I share them on the show all the time. But I just have that taste because I don't think it belongs in freight brokerage. And I never have thought it was a good idea to have venture capital and freight brokerage, even TMS light tech enabled freight brokerages. It
sure,
doesn't make sense to me. But for technology companies, it's probably the best funding vehicle. And you can accelerate growth. You finished seed funding, you had 8 partners, and you had trouble getting somebody to take the lead. And then you raised a Series A. Walk me through Series A and how that worked. Did you have 8 more partners, or how did that go?
No, and it's interesting because our Series A was a happy accident, I like to call it. Really, we had gotten to the end of 22, so we had raised the seed in February 22 and got towards, Q4 of 22, and we were doing our planning for 23 and reached out to our investors, and we didn't necessarily need to raise a Series A. We still had plenty of cash runway, but we reached out to our investors to say, look, as we go into our strategic planning for next year, at some point we are going to want to do a Series A. What are you seeing in the market? Because that was about the time the capital market started kind of changing a little bit. So it was really putting the feelers out. A, what are you seeing in the market? What do you think the market is going to do? And if we were to do a Series A, what are the key milestones that we need to achieve in order to have a favorable Series A round? And at that time, that was just November of 22. So just 9 months after we did our seed, Tiger, who was the lead investor in our seed, said, you know what, because we of course have to report our financials to them
Yeah.
as the lead investor, they said, you guys are kicking ass. We're ready to double down on our investment in you now. So they
Ooh.
were the exclusive investor in our Series A round, which we initiated in November, and I think we closed in, I think January, or maybe we initiated, I can't remember. It was pretty quick. It was weeks just because they were, which is
Yeah.
unusual, by the
They
way,
were
for
already getting the financials and they already
yeah,
knew
yeah,
the
yeah.
EBITDA projections
So
and
the due diligence process wasn't typical for a Series A round. They were already in-house, if you will. So that deal closed in a matter of weeks, which again, please, anybody considering a Series A, don't expect it's going to close in weeks. It won't, I promise you. Um,
that's so awesome. Founders and startups and CEOs need so much to go correctly in order for a business to actually succeed. That's why 97% of businesses don't succeed. But I mean, I just take it back to November 2022, funding was still available. It was like the ZERP era was ending, but no one knew it was totally ending. In 2023, 2024, not the same thing. So a happy little accident that they wanted to do it exclusively, but also timing. Seed
right.
to A is not normally 9 months either. So
No,
that's atypical.
it's
And
usually years. Yeah,
you raised before you needed to. All of these things you did correctly. Now that's obviously because of your leadership. You also are well connected with Ben and others. But I mean, this is a really cool success story. But I mean, if you look at the idea of, hey, you wouldn't normally be able to raise a Series A that quickly. And if you would have waited till November of 23, you might not have raised the A at the same value. You would have got less money. It would have been a totally different thing.
correct. All of those things. So happy accident, as I said, right?
Oh man, that's awesome. Here's another thing too. So if I go into, you said due diligence was different that time. Take me through what is due diligence when you're going to sell your company, not specifically GreenScreens Triumph. I know you can't get
Right.
into details, but every CEO and founder should be trying to build a company that's worth exiting, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point? I want to keep Rocket forever, to be clear, but I'm building it so that I don't have to run it. So either I'm going to exit or somebody else is going to be the CEO someday.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm just owning a job, and I don't want to do that forever.
Sure.
But I want to go through one of the things is what is due diligence? I always hear that thrown around. What's exclusivity period? What's a letter of intent? Just take me through as much as you know about it. You're kind of the resident expert. You're probably the most recent one to have sold a company. So go
Right.
for it.
And I'm still learning, by the way, but let's see, we'll take those. Well, I want to make a distinction because due diligence for a capital raise versus due diligence for selling your company are going to be very different, right?
Different
They're
metrics you're looking for.
very different metrics. One is investors want to make sure they're going to get a return on their investment. And while an acquirer wants to make sure of the same thing, they also need to make sure that they're not taking on more risk, that nobody's going to sue them or you and therefore them when they acquire, a lot of things like that. So due diligence when you're being acquired is much more involved, right? Often than
Yeah.
when you're doing a Series A or any round for that matter. Um, in the past, I have been part of an exit, but it was more of an exit where the founders of the company sold to a PE firm, right? And
Hmm.
then that company stayed intact and independent, but owned by a PE firm. This is the really
Which is pretty common in our industry. That happens a lot.
correct, correct. But I'll just talk generally when you are selling your company to a new buyer on, so first of all, what is due diligence? Due diligence is just that. The buyer or investor is doing diligence in making sure that they understand as much as legally possible, permissible about your business without violating antitrust and all of those things to give them the assurance that A, they're going to get a return on their investment, that they're not taking on risk, that your product is what you say it is, right? So I like to compare due diligence to a proctology exam followed by a colonoscopy followed by a root canal, if I'm being completely honest with you. And that is a good due diligence process, right?
Yeah.
About you. So it's really, they're going to look under just about every rock, and it's reams and reams and reams of data and information and conversations, and often being asked the same question multiple times, multiple ways, right? And it's just, the buyer or the investor is really just trying to cover themselves, right? Making sure that there's no legal issues or anything like that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people think of it as, oh, due diligence. I just share my trailing 12 and then I go with projections and I just say, hey, accounting firm, send them the financials,
Yeah.
and then you're done. No, it's
No.
everything else. What's your customer concentration? What if this customer left? Are they contracted, or is this just a month-to-month deal?
Yes.
What happens if you leave? Are you gonna, like, how long's your non-compete? All of
Right.
that stuff is due diligence
We
for
want to
real.
see every customer contract and every vendor
We want to
contract.
talk to all of your customers. It doesn't even make sense. What do you want to talk to them for?
Right,
So,
right. So there's a lot of that. And again, I am not speaking specifically of Triumph. I want to be really clear that
yep.
it was a very fast and relatively, pain-free process with them, but just in general,
Certainly very
that's what,
fast. I mean,
yeah,
if you just started talking to him in December when Aaron was talking about that, and you guys have already, that's a quick one. I have been part of a few acquisitions or a couple acquisitions, but I was just an employee always. So like I was at Unishippers when Worldwide Express and Unishippers private equity kind of rolled each other up, and it was a weird exchange. And then I was also at DLS Worldwide when
sure.
TFI bought DLS Worldwide, and now it's called T-Force Worldwide. And then shortly after they bought UPS Freight, I was an employee or a contractor at DLS Worldwide. So I saw it from there. And then obviously I've tried to, I've acquired brands in the past with Rocket Shipping, and I've tried to acquire brands and done my own due diligence of like, what would I be looking for? So I've only ever been on the other side at Rocket, but I've never heard a good story about due diligence and how fun it is. So,
Exactly.
but
Yeah,
I do
no,
think
lots of fun.
it's kind of fun that you can draw a contrast. You were at 3G TMS and you were a co-founder there, and you had a private equity exit there, which is a different type of exit. And that's actually, depending on your goals, most founders and CEOs prefer that type of an exit because they get to kind of stay, and they can still run the company, but it's recapitalized,
Right.
and they can take chips off the table, a little less risk. They don't wake up every morning going, I have my entire life
Life
savings on the line.
savings in this and my
Which is,
retirement. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so, I mean, Rocket Shipping, I'm still bootstrapping 5 years in. That is what I have on
Good.
the line.
Good for you. Yeah.
Eventually I'll recapitalize, or I'll sell, or I'll bring in a partner, or I'll merge. I don't know when. It might be another 5 years, but right now we can do it bootstrapped. But I do hear stories. I heard you saying, oh, we could get this booth and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I still can't do that.
Yeah.
We have enough money to do it, but I just never think it's worth it.
Sure.
And so I go to shows, but I walk them. And so we've just always done it a different way.
Right.
But take me through running a company, not just raising money. And I'm going to come back to Series A and ask about what due diligence is in Series A compared to exiting and EBITDA and Rule of 40. I think those are interesting things. But running GreenScreens, running 3G TMS, how do you do it? Do you have departments? Do you have sales and marketing separate? Like, take me through the nuts and bolts of building a company that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, well, um, 3G, we started in 2013 and we had essentially six founders, and each of the founders was a department head, if you will,
Oh,
right?
nice.
So,
That's kind of cool.
yeah, so we had, our CEO, obviously, and he was the primary investor and founder, but then we had one founder, co-founder was the head of product development, and I was the head of product strategy, and we had another founder who was the head of customer success and another one who was the head of implementation, right? And
Oh,
then
cool.
we just kind of built our teams like that. Greenscreens was and Greenscreens was very different. So when we started Greenscreens, I came on board and we had a team of developers, and I'll go back to that origin story. When they extracted the technology out of that digital freight brokerage, they also took the entire development team from that company and moved it over,
Which
right?
is why in
So
your seed you needed sales and marketing, not dev. Okay, I was going to
correct.
ask that. So,
Correct. So, and we may have shored up that
mhm.
development team a little bit to support some of the growth, but it was really sales and marketing. So I lost my train of thought on that. Okay, so we had a development team
Yep.
that was really well functioning, but we had really nothing else. We had no sales, we had no marketing, we had no customer success. The product managers in the development team were essentially the customer success, the implementers and the customer success people. Even me coming on as the CEO for our first, I want to say, six early adopters, pilot customers. I was the business analyst, I was the implementer, I was the salesperson, the
That's
pre-sales
kind of
person.
cool.
Um,
That's
so,
got to be so rare too, because, and I don't mean to interrupt, but most time when you're a hired CEO, you're hired to come run the company, but you were basically like a founder CEO just because you're so early and you were doing
right.
all of the business functions, even though you were interim. That's
Yep.
very unique. I've never heard of that actually.
It
Normally it's
was.
founder and CEO or hired CEO. There's not normally something in between. So Ben was cooking some stuff up with you.
Yeah, it was fun. And I will say our first customer success manager that we hired was actually my daughter, who, because of the timing of COVID, she had worked in the trade show industry as a customer success manager and account manager and lost her job because trade shows just weren't
Mhm.
happening. And we were not bootstrapped, but didn't have a lot of money. And my daughter needed a job. And I was like, look, I can't really pay you that much, but I'm your mom, so I can help you if you need it. But I really need somebody because I can't keep up with this on my own. So she joined, and then she was doing. So she didn't really have a freight background, but she did have a customer success account management background. She knew enough about freight because trade show logistics, that was part of her job, right? Is making sure the booths arrive on time.
Yeah.
Didn't have a lot of freight experience, but she grew up with me. So she's been hearing about freight her whole life. And
Whether she
um,
wanted to or not.
yeah, so then it was just the two of us for a while, and really, though, when we started to grow, it was the end of 21. We brought in a VP of sales. So then at that point, I was no longer needing to be the primary salesperson. I could focus more on growing the customer success team. And at that point, my daughter left. Because her boss was a jerk. No, I'm kidding. Trade shows opened up again, and she had a great opportunity in her field. And I was like, of course, you need to do that. So we hired another customer success manager. We hired a customer analyst, and then it was kind of the three of us on the customer side. Brought in a VP of sales. He was able to focus, and really, that's when our true growth started, is when I was able to bring somebody in to exclusively focus on selling, who
Hmm.
was an experienced seller, right? I did okay selling, but I'm not an experienced
Yeah.
seller. Um, he and I split the marketing function for about a year. After that, it was kind of partnerships and marketing. We shared, like, we split our time in something we did in our spare time and trying to build up the brand. And then it was kind of after we did that A round, then we were able to bring in a professional marketer, somebody who could actually own marketing. And then
Yep.
shortly, Celine, who is our current VP of marketing. And then about a month later, we brought on Mr. Matt Silver to lead the partnership function. So it was, that was what, 22, when we were finally
Matt
able
Silver
to.
was at Green Screens?
Matt, not
Not the
Cargado,
same.
Matt Silver,
Okay.
transport, the best beard in logistics, Matt Silver is at Green
I was
Screens
like, wait a minute, my
currently.
brain just broke.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought it was Forager and Cargado.
No, there
Uh,
are two Matt Silvers in this industry, and I call our Matt Silver the Matt Silver. Um,
well, I mean, now I'm going to have to invite both of them on the show because I'm going to
there
invite
you
Matt Silver
go.
eventually, but I'll
No,
invite the Matt Silver maybe first just to make Matt Silver at Cargado feel bad. I'm going to clip this. Carly, we need to clip this and post it and tag Matt Silver.
we
So,
could do that. And it's a running joke between the Matts and I, so
okay,
it's
so
all
make sure
good.
you put in the caption, Carly, the best beard, the Matt Silver, and then, of course, Cargado Matt Silver as a side note.
There we go. There we go.
Just having some fun here. So you brought on Matt Silver for what function?
Partnerships.
Oh, cool.
Partnerships, and then shortly thereafter brought on a VP of customer success, right? So we had a customer success team, and again, they were all reporting to me. And interestingly enough, even though at the beginning I was wearing multiple hats, um, as the company grew, my time became less available, right? So I had less time to do all of those other things, more time being consumed on
Fundraising.
CEO things, fundraising and answering to investors and things like that. So
Going to trade shows, all of the travel,
yeah,
all of the stuff. Yeah.
being on podcasts with people like you, right? So
Yep.
yeah, all of those things. So so it was really, after we raised money that we were able to kind of build out these functions. And today we have 47 people globally.
47, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah, that's
Yeah, or
awesome.
actually, I'm sorry, 49. We've hired a couple of people recently, so 49 globally. All of our tech is in Eastern Europe, so
Nice.
or throughout Europe, mostly Eastern Europe. We actually have a physical location in Lithuania, in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, and then we have a bunch of digital nomads as well that are kind of scattered throughout Eastern and Western Europe that are on our tech team, and then all of our customer facing roles are here in the US, and we're a fully virtual company. I think that was another thing, and I've been a firm believer of this even going back to my time at 3G is I'm more about hiring the right person in any location than hiring a person in a specific location. And I think that's been another key to our success is being able to find the right people because we are fully remote.
I would echo that 100%. So you guys fully launched or like soft launched in December 2020, right? Is when you said you started to rocket shipping launched in December of 2020 as well.
Okay.
And so I've always hired from all over the US, whoever I could find that was the best at the job or whatever role. And so we have like 5 people in the office and the rest are everywhere else.
Right.
And so it's the same thing. I think it was an advantage. We didn't consciously make that choice. We didn't have another choice. There was no, you couldn't open an office in December of 2020.
Right.
Nobody would have gone to it. It was like peak Delta wave election craziness. It was not a great time to just be like, hey, you want to come and hang out in the office with our masks?
Yeah.
And if I don't know, do you have any good travel stories from those days? I've got a couple, but I'll ask you first.
No, I actually didn't travel. I'm trying to think, like, I don't think I
Well,
traveled
nobody was
until
traveling. It was crazy.
I think it was like the end of 21, early 22 before which was lovely because I was a near full-time traveler before that.
Before that,
I was
yeah.
like, and by the way, I live in Florida, which I used to jokingly refer to Florida as the land where COVID doesn't exist. We shut down for like 3 weeks, and
We're
that
so
was
similar.
it.
I was in North Dakota, also another land where COVID did not exist, but kind of funny in hindsight. At the time, it was crazy. If I'm in Fargo, which is a border town to a border city, I guess most people would call it a town. It's 200,000 people. It's pretty big, guys.
Yeah, yeah,
But there's a border. It's Minnesota is Moorhead. Fargo is North Dakota. Every business was shut on one side of the river and every business was open on the other. And so
yeah,
you couldn't see a more clear difference state by state than being on the river in
sure.
Fargo, North Dakota. So all the bars stayed open in North Dakota. And as you can imagine, they did well. And like if everybody would have been shut down, it would have been one story. But since they were open, all the Minnesota bars ended up going out of business.
Oh
And
wow, yeah,
it was a
that's
whole like transformation.
yeah,
But you
that's
were in Florida, I was in North Dakota, the land where it almost didn't exist.
yeah. Well, and it was interesting. I still remember to this day. So my husband is a musician, and it was St. Patrick's Day 2020, and he was in the middle of a gig, and the police walked in, and they were like, "We're shutting everybody down." Like he had to stop playing
What a
and
wild
leave
time.
in the middle of the gig, and then the places that that served food were able to stay open, but you couldn't consume alcohol on premise, but you could take alcohol to go. Like it was just
Hey,
this
that was a
really,
huge benefit.
I
Alcohol
know,
to go. Why didn't we stick with
I
that?
know,
Come on,
right? I know.
drive-through alcohol?
And I think
Kidding, you shouldn't do that.
no,
Drive-through.
you should. We still have drive-through liquor stores here. There's one right up the street
You,
from my
Florida
house.
is, you're in Florida still, right? What
Yeah.
part?
So East Coast near Vero Beach, north of Palm Beach,
I know where
near
Vero
Vero
Beach is.
Beach. Yeah.
Cool.
So,
I'm a Clearwater guy. We always go to
okay.
Clearwater or Orlando because my wife is a Disney fanatic. So
Okay.
I have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2, and they've all been to Disney more than once.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
that's my life.
I am
I do
going.
like it as well. I always pretend I don't like Disney because it's difficult pushing a stroller for 74 hours in 3 days. But I digress. I do like it.
I did my time. I am done. I am done.
Well, so I got to share my story. So in December of 2020, I was flying November and December because I was leaving DLS Worldwide and I was starting rocket shipping. And I was an independent contractor for DLS at the time. So I basically was already running my own shop. But I had decided, hey, I can hire employees and build this out and start e-commerce LTL. It'll be a cool thing. And freight had recovered to the point where I was like, okay, I can start it now because I was going to start it in March or May. And I had had a newborn in May. So I was like, well, maybe I should wait a little bit. But one of the funniest stories I have from that is that I had to fly out to visit one of my customers who was going to come to rocket shipping with me. And they were a newer brand. And I was like trying to convince them, hey, I'm going to start rocket shipping. You should totally believe in me and spend all your LTL e-commerce with me. And they said, well, fly out here. So I did, but they were in Idaho. And I ended up getting my own private jet because no one else was on the entire, it was just me and the
Oh,
flight attendants from Denver to Idaho on United. It was just me and the flight attendants, and they
oh,
brought
wow.
champagne, and we all were sitting like 4 seats apart with our masks, just sipping champagne. So I'll probably have to post a clip of that with a picture I took of like the whole
Yes,
flight, just me.
definitely. I
And
was
then I
gonna
got,
say. Bootstrap founder, you were living pretty large there when you said
Yeah.
private, but now I get it. Now I get
No,
it.
turns out it was just a $200 economy ticket. Although I think at the time it like flights were like free because United and Delta didn't have anybody to fly. So like the prices were as low as they ever were. It was like $140 to fly there. Now if I go there, it's 1,000. It's crazy.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so, but I always tell that story because then when I got to the conference room and the CEO of this company, he's got two N95 masks on. He hands me a couple of N95s to put on my blue mask, and we're in like opposite corners of the room. And this is fun to tell now. In the meantime, it was all crazy. But North Dakota, like masks weren't even a thing hardly. Like some people wore them.
Yeah.
And then different states, oh my goodness, I had never tried an N95 on. So I was in the corner with two N95s pitching why they should go to rocket shipping. And this guy used to be an investment banker and take companies public, and then he started this company and like lives on a mountain. So he's an intimidating CEO. And
Sure.
that was my founder story. I was like, hey, then they came over, and that they're still one of our biggest
Congratulations.
brands today, 5 years later. So,
There you go. Well, it
but
was the pitch worked.
fun times. So let me pivot back again. I heard a little bit about how you built out the company. Take me through Series A and Rule of 40 and explain what that means. I've heard Craig Fuller tweet at me about Rule of 40, and I still don't understand it. What does it mean? And did you guys have to use that or not for your A?
Well, yeah, and again with the A, a little bit different because
Yeah,
Tiger
you had the
was
happy
already
accident. True.
invested. Yeah, the happy accident. So for us, that being said, a lot of those SaaS metrics, there's like the magic number and the rule of 40, and there's a bunch of, the ROMI, return on marketing investment. So there's a number of SaaS metrics that even when we're not in a fundraising mode or an exit mode, I watch, right? Because
Hmm.
to me, that is a measure of health of a SaaS business, right?
Yeah.
So rule of 40 is essentially it is taking a look at your percentage growth rate year over year as compared to your gross profit margin.
Hmm.
And it's essentially just a formula. So if you take your annual growth rate minus, I'm going to screw up the formula, um, your gross profit margin, it should be 40 or more, right?
Yep.
And that is a healthy business, right? And that is just something that investors use to make sure, is the business growing, in line with the gross profit margin, right? So that's essentially what it is. And I think there's a lot of mixed feelings about if it's really valid or not as a measurement of the health of a
Hmm.
business, and unfortunately has permeated the VC world as kind of the metric that everybody needs to watch, right? So if your growth rate slows down, if you start experiencing churn, but you're not yet profitable, and I think that's a key thing, most startup tech companies are not profitable.
That's why
Like,
they have to use the Rule of 40. That's what I argued with Greg or Craig online, and I agree with him on a lot of stuff. So,
yeah, they're not
but
profitable. And you mentioned EBITDA before too. That's the other thing, and multiples and things like that. That's the other thing with startup tech and
SaaS and startup,
fundraising is it's not a multiple on EBITDA because
it's
EBITDA
on
is
revenue,
negative. It's on annual recurring
ARR.
revenue. ARR is kind of the measurement that you would usually use for a tech company.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the same thing with Rocket. We've started as a freight brokerage. We've built some really good tech in final mile and e-commerce, and now we have a whole SaaS business, and it's doing really well. But I'm trying to blend the Rule of 40. We don't need that because we're bootstrapped and profitable. But SaaS multiples or EBITDA multiples, and I'm just trying to. Frankly, I'm doing both, and I'm just
Yeah,
saying, hey, this is a cool business because it can do both. But it is a whole different world, SaaS and
yeah,
freight brokerage. And a typical brokerage, if they're going to sell, it's 3 to 5x EBITDA.
right.
But a SaaS multiple can, during 2022, it was like 15, 20x ARR. Now it's maybe 10x ARR, but I think it's starting to be a little more ZERP era in the capital markets right
Yeah.
now.
I mean, I think look, in the VC world, private capital world, that averages, and it's been a few months since I looked at this, but let's say going back to like Q3, the average was about 6 to 8, 6 to 9x
On ARR.
on ARR. A premium multiple would be like 10 to 12, right? And there's certain things that will give you a premium, high growth rate. AI right now is kind of the darling of the VC world, so AI gets you to a multiple, but you have to have all of those other things too. It can't just be like, well, look at me, I'm an AI company, but I have a rule of 40 is 10. That wouldn't fly. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Isn't it funny you call it rule of 40 and then give the number? It's kind of like ROAS, but
Yeah.
it's like a metric, but it's rule of 40. But then there's another number. It's always kind of redundant.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's important to talk about it because a VC company or a privately capitalized company in SaaS would measure those metrics, just like an e-commerce company. And I used to run one of those, would measure ROAS. You need to have your ROAS over 5. Your return on ad spend can't be 2. You're not making money. That's before shipping. What are you doing? And so a lot of these metrics, a lot of founders aren't just following whatever metrics they've been told to. But I think in an interesting environment, like if you guys Triumph buys you, you guys complete that, then you get to run a whole different type of business.
Yeah.
Because now it's okay, you're privately held. Well, publicly held. I don't know how that
Public,
would
yeah.
work, but I can't speculate. But you're going to be publicly held. Those metrics maybe are now all brand new.
Oh, they're going to be completely different.
Yeah,
Which,
so
you
it's
know,
like
and
you got a
I
task
do have
switch.
experience in working for a public company, and yeah, it's completely different accounting rules, right? You're
Yeah.
as a public company, GAAP accounting, right? Is you have to follow GAAP accounting, and whereas with a startup, it's cash accounting usually, right? It's
We
so
just converted from cash to accrual and we're trying to do GAAP now. And so I've been going through that. I have a CFO that's been advising that. It's like a whole thing.
yeah,
I just ran it cash based because the easiest way in a bootstrap business and a startup is to be like, well, how much money do we have? Not how much money's tied up in receivables, but
right,
what's in our bank account because payroll is next week.
yeah.
How am
Well,
I supposed to run accrual?
exactly. So our focus for, the past several years has been on cash flow, right? Cash runway, cash
Yeah,
flow, cash burn. And
basically how many days until 0, and then we gotta.
yes, and build revenue as opposed to bookings, right? Now, as you get bigger and you become, bookings become more important, right? We actually have a pretty short implementation timeline, so there's not a big lag between bookings and billings, but yeah, so
That's actually interesting. Bookings and billings, and I don't know anything about it. Let's just say I don't know anything. I would venture to guess that's why most SaaS companies try to just say, "Hey, it's an upfront annual fee." And they don't get away with it if they're not the biggest brand in the space that can do that because nobody wants to pay first and find out later.
right,
But the ones who can do that, because then build and booked is the same thing.
right.
You may not have delivered the product yet, but you build.
Right.
That is
Well,
interesting.
yes, before, and that's for a private company, that's great. But when you're a part of a public company, you can't book any revenue. There's all the revenue recognition rules, right? Like
Hmm.
there could be, when I worked for a public company, there could be nothing in the contract that alludes to future product deliverables. Otherwise, the entire contract is unrecognizable, right? So if it's like you sold the deal, but you're selling them a future module that's in that contract that they're going to pay for, that can't be in the contract because otherwise
Oof.
the entire contract is unrecognizable. So it gets really complicated again, public versus private and all of that, but
Yeah.
that's why I think it is easier to say here's our build, here's what we're actually billing right now, right? So
Well, that makes sense too. And I listened to a podcast called the All In Podcast, and now it's very popular. I used to listen to it back in 2020 when it was kind of smaller. I'm an OG. That's like, I feel like I just aged as I'm saying that because that's like me saying I listened to that band when they were new before anybody knew about it. But I just aged there. My bad. Anyways, as I was saying on the All In podcast, the two co-founders of Stripe were on, and they're
oh
still a
well,
private company. And they were talking about why they still are private, even though everybody thinks they should go public. And I think a lot of it has to do with revenue recognition, building new tools,
yeah,
and being able to fundraise off of that because there are multiple hundreds of billions of revenue
yeah,
that they transact on. I think they said they do $1 trillion now, $1 trillion of
wow,
transacted revenue
wow.
through Stripe. That's just crazy.
And when were they founded again?
2014,
Okay,
20.
well,
So they're not like $1 trillion company, obviously, because they just take a percentage, but
sure,
they're now as big. I think they're the biggest in the whole space of any other company, even the public ones, besides, of course, Visa, MasterCard, and those. But they're commingled with them. And I can't say I know too much about Stripe, but they were like the other hosts were like, why have you not gone public? Why haven't you IPO'd? Because they could go at a massive valuation and then all of their employees and people could get cashed out
right,
and they won't do it. They're basically like, well, we
interesting,
don't want to. And so they're two brothers who more than a decade now, they've been building one of the most valuable companies in the world and it's just private. And they have
interesting,
capital partners, but they've just kept it private. And I think mostly because they have the flexibility to go off of whatever metrics they think their business should instead of off of the public markets.
Yeah.
So you do compromise on the public markets, although you get a huge benefit for fundraising.
Sure.
You have a share price, although it doesn't always make it a benefit. I've seen a lot of companies that are public have to split, and then they.
Yeah. I've lived through that many years ago. I get it. I get it.
You've lived through a lot for being 36 years old. Man. This is
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. As I like to say, I'm 29 with 30 years, 35 years experience or something like that.
That would
No,
really
sorry,
age you
20,
at that 25
25,
years.
25
Okay.
years
I
experience.
was like,
Yeah.
Don, I was helping you out there. Now you really aged
No,
yourself.
no, no,
You're
no.
not in
Sorry.
your 60s, I
Math
promise.
is hard. No, it's 55. Double nickels. I'm proud of it.
I'm shocked that you don't look 55, and I'm not just saying that.
Well,
just
thank
to,
you. I'm pickled.
get the likes, the clicks. But I do want to ask you a few questions as we kind of wrap up here. I wish I could go a lot longer with you because we've got so many topics we could cover. But you said before the show started that you'd come back when you can talk about the acquisition. I'm going to hold you to that.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions I ask is, what mistake did you make along the way of building either GreenScreens or 3G or anything in your career that you didn't have to make, right? And I always position it as there are mistakes that we make as founders and CEOs that were formative to who we are now and where the company's at. But did you do anything stupid that you could just share? Maybe somebody else that's building a company, whether it's with fundraising or with hiring and firing, anything you're like, I didn't need to make that mistake and we would have been better off. You can learn from me type of thing.
Wow, that's a loaded question. There's been so many mistakes. I'm just trying to think of.
Maybe there's a theme. Maybe you made multiple mistakes in the same type of area, or maybe it's
You know what? I would say in the people area, and I want to clarify that because the team that I have an amazing team, and we've been very, very fortunate with the team that we've assembled here. But and this isn't just a mistake that I made here at GreenScreens. It's a mistake that I've made in my past. And what I mean there is recognizing that you have an issue with somebody and waiting too long to take care of the issue. And that's something I've actually repeated a few times.
it's human nature to repeat that error. Almost everybody does.
Yeah. And, because I truly care about my people, and it's like, well, let's give this person the benefit of the doubt or give them another chance. And then, when things get to the point where, you start losing credibility because others see the problem and know you're not doing anything about it, or they become harmful to the business and in other ways. So that is a mistake that I've repeated probably at least 3 or 4 times in my experience. And I think it just comes from a place of truly believing the best in people and caring about people and wanting to help people grow. But I think, that's the one thing to look out for, right? Is recognizing it, not just recognizing it, but taking action early. And action doesn't necessarily mean that you need to fire somebody, put them on a PIP or something, right?
Or at least have the conversation.
Right.
Here's where I'm not sure if you're aware, but you're not performing to the standard that we thought. And here's an issue that you're bringing with you. I struggle with that all the time. I think it's because, and actually I'll ask you, do you attribute it more to empathy and caring, or is there an angle of like ego as well? Because mine's more ego and then empathy. It's like, well, I hired this person. I told everybody it was going to be a good idea, and I staked my reputation on it, and then I try to make it work for too long so that I have the credibility. But I've learned I earn credibility more if I fix my mistakes quicker.
Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of that ego in there. I think it was more, though, the empathy and frankly the necessity, because it's like, okay, I could fire this person, but then who the hell is going to do their job, right? Me. And I don't have time to do their job. So would I rather have somebody who isn't performing well, but is still doing something, than me having to pick it up and go through the whole process of hiring somebody new and onboarding and training,
The most
right?
fun process ever is hiring, right?
So I think it was, the combination of the empathy and that, and probably a little ego too, for sure. Yeah. Of, I hired this person.
That's what I've learned. So like, if I died at that ego, then I've run the company so much better. If I'm just like, hey, and I've had to have conversations with the other leaders at Rocket that I'm going to make hiring mistakes. They've just now afforded me the ability to make the mistakes as long as I correct them quickly. But if I don't correct them over time, then I'll lose credibility. And that's what we always risk as CEOs is balancing the credibility of people should trust that we're making the right decisions and we have the right to fail and fix it. But if you don't do it fast enough, and that typically it's a people thing. I always say, I always say that every problem's a people problem. I don't say that. That's what the market says. That's what everybody says. But my favorite thing is people. And so there's a paradox there.
Yeah,
Everything is a people problem, but my favorite thing about running a business is the people. Yeah. And so I've always leaned way on the other side of firing anybody for any reason unless it was completely obvious, which has not been the best decisions for Rocket over time. I've taken my lumps because of that.
Correct.
So
I will say this on the people front, though. I am the last person in the world that should be in charge of HR. And again, being a small growing company, I just hired my HR person at the beginning of 2024. And it was, I love all of my people, but my HR person was probably the best hire ever, mostly just because I have no business being in an HR role.
We're more similar than I realized.
Yeah.
Gabe, you can't say that. Well, yeah, I can, right?
Yes.
Right?
I actually have a notebook over there. I'm not going to get it. The cover of it says things I can't say in meetings, and every page at the bottom of it says something that I can't say in meetings. And my HR person gave it to me, so yeah.
We have Tessany is our HR thermometer, I'll call it. I read the temperature based off of if she feels it's okay to say, then I say it. And she's my sister-in-law. But she's really good at that stuff. And we did just actually bring in an outsourced HR for payroll and benefits, and they help us with that stuff. It has been a huge difference. Yeah. But I also think it's fun to run your company the way that I actually am and the way you actually are, because you'll attract the right people that way too. Right. So yeah, Don, thank you for sharing your mistakes and your successes. And there's so much more I could have dug into with Series A and due diligence and seed, and you've done it all. But hey, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
A successful exit, an intention for successful exit. Fingers crossed, all the government, the banking, all the regulations that shouldn't exist because it's just the way America shouldn't run. Sure. Goes through, you get your exit, and I hope that you continue running GreenScreens and stay for a long time and crush it. So
that is the plan. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and I would love to come back another time in the future to talk more. This has been great.
All right, and remember, this is now after the show, but we have to clip that Matt Silver part, and that's gonna have to be one of the things that come out. So I appreciate it. Have a great day, Don.